My name's Alex Renton. I'm both a journalist and a survivor. Every time I publish or broadcast an expose of child abuse, my inbox gets busy, sometimes scarily so. People are triggered. They dig up old memories, and they write to me looking for relief or revenge, or just for someone to hear their story. Those emails can be very hard to look at. But one day in spring 2024, I get an email that I can't stop looking at. Attached to the message is a scan of a typewritten document. I mean, it's about 30, 40 pages. So starting at the top, we can't say who it's from, but he is a credible source. And sort of roughly typed on an old, obviously sort of manual typewriter. And then, yeah, a load of names in TypeScript. It's a list of names, pages and pages of them. A few women, but mostly men. And the majority of those names I've never heard, though some I know all too well. Now that's ringing all sorts of not pleasant bells. I need to look that one up. Because written on the list are 3 letters, P-I-E, pie. And that gives me reason to believe that each of these people have one thing in common: a sexual attraction to children. It's so shocking. My God. I mean, I know that we'll find people with multiple convictions for child offences on this list. I have no idea if this list is genuine. But what if it is? I need to track down where it came from, who the people are, and what they actually did. It's like being handed a loaded gun. This is In Dark Corners Series 2. Episode 1, The List. For years, I've kept a spreadsheet of all the child abuse allegations sent to me. Over 1,600 now, with 700 schools, more than 400 members of staff. With so much data, you see connections. There were certainly paedophile rings. But was there something bigger, systemic? Not just in the schools, but everywhere. It sounds crazy, doesn't it? The stuff of QAnon and far-right fantasists. But back in the 1970s and 80s, there was a network in Britain of people sexually attracted to children. They saw their group as a place for isolated paedophiles to come together, to build a community, a space for debate, and to seek changes to the law. It wasn't a secret society or some shady brotherhood. It was overt, loud, confident. A pro-paedophile campaigning group operating in Britain. It was called the Paedophile Information Exchange, PI for short. It formed in 1974, a time of feverish cultural transformation. Attitudes were changing in so many areas: work, family, religion, sexuality. Into all this came the pro-paedophile lobby. Equality and justice for all the oppressed. That was the cry then. It was taken up by feminists, anti-racists, the gay rights movement. And PI very cleverly hitched a ride on those bandwagons. Spokesmen for the Paedophile Information Exchange gave interviews, complaining that they were being denied their human rights.
Our political objectives include developing a society where children are given a much higher status than today, where they're recognised as individuals in their own right, and this includes recognising their right to certain sexual freedoms.
But surely it's a question of recognising children's maturity, and how can you have an equal relationship, which is what I take a mature sexual relationship to be?
I don't accept that this concept of maturity at all.
Here are two Pi activists speaking on the BBC's Newsnight programme in August 1983.
Adults, for instance, aren't necessarily mature. It's a long process.
So I take it for granted that no adult is probably ever mature, but nevertheless, my state of maturity, or your state of maturity, is clearly different from that of a child of 12.
Not if children are properly educated about sex.
This is a man called Stephen Adrian Smith, Pi's chair at the time.
And it's an obligation on society to see that children are given a far more comprehensive sexual education from a far earlier age.
On the surface, it operated like any other campaigning group. Members had regular meetings at an Islington pub in liberal North London, and they published a provocative magazine filled with pro-paedophile polemic, juvenile jokes, and photos of children that stayed just on the right side of the law. The magazine was called Magpie, the same name as the popular kids' TV show of the 1970s. You could sign up to Pi and get the magazine for £4 a year. But while the leaders of Pi were very out there, the names of the membership, the rank and file of the organisation, that was kept a secret. Of course, who would want their names made public associated with such a thing? More recently, there have been rumours among conspiracy theorists and deep-diving journalists that there did exist a master list of the Pi membership. There are traces of that online, but I'd never seen the list. I thought it was an urban legend, a myth. Until that day last spring, when I found out how wrong I was. It's April 2024 when this story begins. I call producer Caitlin Smith. She made Series 1 with me. We have to talk this through. Are you hearing me all right now?
Yeah, absolutely.
What do you think? Should I just scoot through it?
Yeah, let's just have a sort of skim through it.
So I'm just flicking onto the first page. It's the first time we've both had a proper look at the document we're told is a list of members. Prominent members of PIE, 1983 to 4, including executive committee members. Sort of roughly typed on an old manual typewriter. Someone has annotated it in black ink, checking through it whether the addresses are current and writing in new ones. And this sort of kind of makes you wonder if this was at one point in police hands. The person who sent us the list doesn't know too much about it, but they think the notes in the margins were written by the police. It looks like someone has formally gone through this, checking addresses, basically, and that would tie in with the police using it for their investigations. I mean, we're going to have to go through all these names.
Yeah.
Sooner or later.
Any names really jump out at you?
So the first name on the first page that I know is Tom O'Carroll, who at the time was president of Pi, and it gives his address, and it then says Publicity Officer, BBC Open University. I spoke to Tom O'Carroll back in 2016. At the time, I was writing a book about boarding schools and the predators who so often worked there. I wanted to get a better understanding of their mindset. O'Carroll was Pi's chair until 1979. Now he's made himself the guardian of the history of Pi, and he's the author of books which excuse and justify paedophilia. He started out as a teacher, but when Pi began, he was working as a press officer for the Open University, then in partnership with the BBC. He's been convicted 3 times, in 2016 for indecent assault and gross indecency against 2 children, dating back to 1978, of distribution of child sexual abuse images in 2006, and of conspiring to corrupt public morals in 1981. We spoke for 3 hours. O'Carroll is fascinating in the most gruesome way. He's clever, articulate, and utterly obsessed. He's almost 80 now. His life has been spent trying, and completely failing, to sell the idea that consensual sex between children and adults should be legal. When we talked back then, he mentioned two of his old Pi colleagues, Charles Napier, an ex-boarding school teacher, then serving his prison sentence for assaulting small boys, and Peter Wrighton, a childcare expert and a government advisor. O'Carroll told me he liked and respected both men. He was hoping to visit his friend Napier in prison. He called Wrighton kind and avuncular. And he casually told me how Wrighton and Napier preferred young boys, while he himself liked both sexes. When I put the phone down, I felt grubby. Groomed. Scanning through the Pi membership list all these years later, producer Caitlin and I are both conscious this could be a hoax. But names are popping up that make sense.
Charles Napier, Sweden.
There we go. He has just got out of jail, I think. What's shocking is the addresses. Who would provide personal details like that? Especially if you're in a profession involving children. It seems such a mad risk. We've got a lot of comparing and looking to do. But just that first quick flick through, what an extraordinary document. And the implications are huge. We're heading off to meet journalist Francis Wheen. He picks us up at a station in North Essex and whizzes us through winding country lanes to his home. Francis was deputy editor of Private Eye for 30 years.
How are you for sound?
Good.
Good?
Yeah.
The magazine has covered more than its fair share of stories about establishment paedophiles. If there's anyone who'll have insight into Pi's membership, it'll be Francis. And Francis, do you want to know what we're up to, or should we just go ahead?
Well, I'd love to know what you're up to.
Francis has a long memory and a nose for stories that people in power want to keep secret. We have been delivered a list.
Have you
Would
really?
you like to have a look at it?
What, from the 70s?
Well, it's dated. Have a look.
High list. Good Lord.
You're sworn to secrecy here, Francis.
Yes. Golly. I'm trying to see if I recognise any of these names, but I don't think I do.
There is another reason I want to speak to Francis about the Pi list. I watch as he runs his finger down the columns. He stops at Pi member number 116, Charles Napier, his abuser.
Well, I first met Charles Napier in, I should think, 1968, when I was 11. And he joined as the youngest master at this prep school on the Surrey-Sussex border. And most of the masters there were quite old and quite odd in most cases. And some of them odd in a good way. I mean, the sort who makes an inspiring teacher. I mean, and it was all very educational. But on the other hand, Napier, he seemed much more on our level because he was in his 20s. And he talked to us almost as equals, really. And we really liked him for that. He, very early on, decided he took over the gym as his preserve as well, and encouraged some of us to come to the gym. And there was a little room off the gym which he somehow managed to acquire, a workshop-y type room. And so his favourites, who included me, would go to the gym and vault over horses and climb the wall bars and things.
After playing around in the gym, the sessions would move on to that little room, where Napier gave those 11-year-old boys cigarettes and beer.
So we thought this is even more grown-up and exciting.
Francis takes a deep breath. I've spoken to many survivors. I know when I'm about to hear them speak of their abuse.
And then one day, after a few weeks of this, grooming, as I suppose you'd now call it, so it didn't occur to me at the time, he suddenly plunged his hand down my gym shorts while we were all standing around in this little room off the gym. And I grabbed his wrist and removed his hand from my gym shorts and said, "No, thank you. What are you doing?" And he then started sneering at me and said, "Oh, you're so immature. You're such a baby. don't be such a baby. You're obviously not grown up enough for these sorts of things. Unlike, and then pointed at the other boys who were in the gym with me. There are about sort of 4 or 5 of us. He said, he lets me do it. He lets me do what I want, and he's grown up enough to understand these things. But you're just a baby, which is very clever. I mean, I'm sure modern students of grooming techniques would say this is exactly what a groomer would do. Make you feel inadequate and immature, as if it's your fault that you're not really keen on him playing around with your genitals. So I rather dropped out of his group after that. After I'd rebuffed him, I was no longer invited to his little room off the gym and given beer and cigarettes. Although by then, of course, I knew where he hid them, where he kept them. And so I used to just break in and take the beer and fags and go off to the little woods behind the school and get drunk and smoke.
So you said several other boys. Did you know independently about their abuse? And what form do you think that abuse took?
They themselves didn't really speak about it, and we didn't speak about it in general, because I mean, certainly what I now know, the scale that he was abusing on, it really wasn't, I mean, it was just sort of acknowledged. It was known that Napier, it gradually came to be known that Napier liked, Mr. Napier, as we called him, liked doing sex-related things with boys. And about a year or so after I'd left, my younger brother came home for the holidays and said, "Oh, you'll never guess what, Mr. Napier's had to leave in a hurry." And one boy, after all these years, about 3 years of Napier abusing boys by then, had the nous to go to the headmaster, and the headmaster actually did act and summoned Napier. Certainly, according to the school legend at the time, as told by my younger brother, Napier just got into his rather natty sports car and drove off at such speed that he pranged his car on the gatepost as he was leaving.
Francis had known Napier was a key player in Pi long before we arrived in Essex that day. In fact, he's been aware of the link since the late 70s.
I was trying to do some freelance journalism, and I got the Telegraph, Daily Telegraph, I think the feature said, I rang him and said, "This Pi, this thing that's in the papers, would you like to know more about it? It sounds quite interesting to me."
The editor was keen, so Francis called up Tom O'Carroll.
Because at the time, Tom O'Carroll, the head of Pi, was press officer at the Open University, which had been mentioned in 1 or 2 of the stories about him. I just rang the Open University and said, "Can I have the press office, please?" And got through to Tom O'Carroll. So I said, "Hello, it's Francis Wheen here. I'm a journalist. I'm writing something for the Telegraph about paedophile information exchange, this organisation you seem to run." And he had a long chat with me. He said, "Yes, I'm glad you're showing an interest, because we've got these quite reasonable demands. All we're asking for is a change in the law, a sort of liberalisation of the law, of the age of consent law. We want to lower it to 4, the age of consent." And I did a double take and sort of reeled back. I was on the phone to him and I thought, bloody hell, that's quite radical. But he made it sound as if this is just a technical adjustment to bring it up to date with modern manners.
There was more. Pi seemed to have thought it all through, all potential objections.
And he said, "I know some parents might worry about this, but we will have safeguards built in, because if your child is going to have sex with someone, you as a parent can apply for an injunction and try and stop it, and then the judge will decide." I slightly lost for words. But then he said to me, "You ought to talk to our treasurer, Charles Napier. He's very articulate and always has lots to say. I'll put you in touch with him." I said, "No, did he used to teach at a prep school?" He said, "Yes, I believe he has taught at various preps." I said, "Yes, I know him." And that was rather the end of my piece about the Pi, because the combination of the age of consent and my old teacher being treasurer of the organisation did rather stop me in my tracks. I thought, I can't write about this. It's too close to home.
But Francis did eventually feel able to address Napier in print. He published articles in Private Eye and then reported on Napier's 2014 trial for sexual assaults on 23 boys, including 11-year-old Francis. Napier was sentenced to 13 years in prison for those assaults. He got out after 6. We approached Tom O'Carroll, the former chair of Pi. He stated that Pi believed 4 years old was an age at which most children were capable of putting consent into words. We turn back to the pie list. Who's that?
Bibby, why do I know that name?
Francis's eyes widen as he spots names he recognises. I mean, we're slowly going through all of them.
Oh, here's a professor.
He, like me, seems flabbergasted at what we're seeing. It's really frustrating going through it because you go, that rings a bell. That rings a bell. There's a lot to take in. Well, if you see anyone and you think we should... After 2 hours, we say goodbye to Francis, the list reverberating in his head and mine. A few days later, we're contacted by the guy who first passed us the membership list. He gives us a phone number. It's for a source who may have more information on some of the key Pi members. But this source doesn't want to be named or recorded. We'll call him the Worcester contact. Well, that was a weird meeting. Now we're walking away with this sort of bags crammed with documents, files, padded envelopes. It wasn't great talking about paedophilia in a crowded department store cafe.
That's weird.
And he was nervous. He wanted to get out of there quickly. I mean, he insisted we didn't record anything, that his identity shouldn't be revealed. I mean, all he said we can say is that he has looked into Pi and the membership, and he had a connection with Child Protection Services in Worcester back in the day, and that's what's brought him to us now. He has held on to his notes on these cases for over 3 decades, though he tells us he got rid of the really disturbing stuff. He just didn't want it around. And now he's done. He's drained. He's disappointed by how little progress was made, and he doesn't want to get into it all again. So he's giving us his remaining files, and we're taking them all back to the BBC. It's kind of like opening a Christmas stocking, isn't it? I mean, it's Christmas stocking horror, but there's a lot of really interesting stuff in here. So the first document that comes out of the tattered grey carrier bag is something quite interesting. So that is amazing to see the original cover of what says is the Pi List, 1983 to 1984. A hard copy of the Pi membership list. What seems odd is that the cover is a sort of sheet of floppy pink cardboard with a sort of inked in sort of bubble letters, Pi List, rather like the doodling of a sort of 11-year-old in their school jotter. These documents focus primarily on 2 Pi members, Treasurer Charles Napier, member number 116, and the child care expert, Peter Wrighton, number 51. There is a third person not on the list, Richard Alston. He was Wrighton's long-term partner and a head teacher until the early 90s. A quick Google reveals that Wrighton is dead, but Napier and Alston may still be alive. So all this bundle needs more looking at.
Well, let's have a quick look at it.
Well, I think, there's that. The infiltration of the social work profession by paedophiles appears to be an extensive and serious problem. Then Caitlin finds something shocking.
Oh, this is grim. I want to go out with you, sir, because you always treat me nice. From your ever lover, admirer, guess who?
In what file was that?
So this is letters written to Richard Alston.
So this is from clearly a child, probably an adolescent, writing to Peter with an enclosed letter for Richard, meaning Richard Alston. He says, "You are a very, very nice man, aren't you? And your help is much appreciated. As I've said, thanks for all your help. You know you're the best sugar daddy anyone could ask for. I can't think of more to say, so I'll end. See you soon. Lots of love." These are tragic. This is a sort of, what's next, a young and semi-educated child with various sorts of trouble asking for money. Here's a thank you for my Christmas present. It will help me a lot and save on bus fares. I know when sometimes you come over, it must seem like all I'm doing is pouring all your money, poncing all your money. I haven't been down Charlie's for ages. I mean, Charlie's sounds like Charles Napier to me. So here's a letter dated 1980. Hold on a sec. Is that the same address? Oh my God. The letters are from different boys, but they're all from the same address. It just comes up as a 4-bedroom terraced house. We won't disclose the location because we're protecting the identities of some of the people in this story, but we can say it's a village in the south of England. Our Worcester contact collated a huge amount of information, and over the years, like me with the boarding schools, he started seeing connections between the alleged abusers. But did anyone else? Our contact also told us the police had a copy of the Pye list. So what did they do with it? Pye is an information exchange. Did the police ever investigate what information those Pye members were exchanging? In the right hands, you'd think the list would be a tool to save huge numbers of children from sexual abuse. Did anyone try? And if not, why not? In Dark Corners Series 2 is presented by me, Alex Renton. The producer is Caitlin Smith. Research by me, Caitlin Smith, Claire Harris and Marisha Curry. Story consultants Jack Kibble-White and Kirsty Williams. Written by me, Caitlin Smith, Jack Kibble-White and Kirsty Williams. Executive producers are Gail Champion and Gillian Whelan. Sound design by John Nichols. The theme tune is composed by Jeremy Walmsley. Commissioning executive is Tracy Williams. Commissioner is Dan Clark. You can find all episodes of Series 1 and 2 by searching and subscribing to In Dark Corners on BBC Sounds. Details of organisations offering information and support for victims of child sexual abuse are available at bbc.co.uk/actionline.
The Wreath Lectures 20